Pauline was murdered on August 12th. She was killed by gunshots allegedly meant for her husband. Sheriff Buford Pusser of McNairy County, Tennessee. He became famous because of the 1973 hit movie Walking Tall. Pauline has basically been forgotten, her death overshadowed by his fame. Her murder was never solved. The information and evidence in her murder has always been in plain sight. The year Pauline was murdered was 1967. That was 58 years ago. Buford's law enforcement career, and more specifically, Pauline's murder, began as an interest of Mike's. This interest became a hobby, which evolved into a cold case investigation, and finally, a mission. 58 years is long enough to wait. This is the New Hope Methodist Church where the alleged ambush party was thought to have waited for Buford that morning. It's difficult to explain why an ambush party would have chosen this location to intercept the sheriff, as there were other much faster routes, for Buford to have taken to Hollis Jordan's place, a beer joint about a mile north of the state line, to answer a questionable disturbance complaint. Even more difficult to understand it why he would have Pauline with him for such an early morning call, or any call for that matter. Buford's chief deputy, Jim Moffett, stated that Pauline never accompanied him on calls. Take a ride with Mike and see what the ambush route was like from the church to the first ambush site, less than 3/4 of a mile away. Listen to how, according to Buford's story, the first part of the ambush happened, how the Cadillac approached without its headlights on, how only a couple of shots were fired, one striking Pauline in the head, only wounding her. It was nothing like the dramatic scene we saw in the movie Walking Tall, with assassins hanging out the Cadillac's windows, machine guns blazing. While the road has a blacktop surface today, it was just a gravel road, with no homes, lights, or road signs along the way.
Pulled out onto New Hope Road without the use of their headlights and pursued Buford and Pauline. Now, there were no houses down here, no street lights, no road signage. Things have changed a lot since those days. Now, if you can imagine doing this at 4:45 in the morning without your headlights, that's what the legend would have us to believe. Now, Buford claimed that he was going 45 to 50 miles an hour down through here. And of course, he had the benefit of his headlights. Now, the ambush party would have had to accelerate at a very high rate of speed in order to catch him by the time that we reach the first site where the first shots were fired. You see it coming up in the near distance. Okay, this parking lot here at the church is where they were said to be waiting for Buford. Now here, I'm pulling out onto the roadway, but I've had to turn my parking lights on already because I couldn't see the road. Now that does help illuminate the center line, which wasn't there back in the day. Now it's actually closer to 5:15 than 4:45. And you need to keep in mind that back in those days there were no houses, no lights, no road markers. Made it very hazardous to try and drive in this area, especially if with your lights off. And the road had been resurfaced with oil and chert a day or so before, so you had a lot of loose gravel, and going around this curve By this point, by mathematical calculations, an ambush party would have had to have been going almost 100 miles an hour to catch Buford before he got to the first ambush spot. Now it looks a little bit lighter than what it really is. I don't know why, camera setting or something, but it was so dark that my top speed, even using my parking lights as I am here, I reached 32 miles an hour. And that certainly wouldn't have been fast enough to catch Buford, who said he was going 45 to 50. And you're already seeing the ambush site coming up just beyond that road sign there. And of course, all this was gravel back then. It was not blacktop as it is now. So I don't know how an ambush party could have caught up with Buford as he claimed. Now, Buford would go on to say that the Cadillac approached him along about that little bridge back there, fired 2 shots, one striking Pauline in the head. He went on to say that she was only wounded, that she leaned into him. Some versions he would say that she grabbed him by the arm, that she was gasping for breath, and that he just punched it, meaning he hit the gas pedal, and started to try and outrun them. And of course, they weren't even behind him. He didn't see them. And what's the advantage of keeping your headlights off if you've already fired a couple of shots into Buford's vehicle? So what's the advantage of trying to drive this in the dark? Now you can see what it's like when I meet a vehicle. I could see him coming, so I had to turn my headlights on so that he would see me. But that shows you how dark it is out here. At any rate, he said he tried to get to his sidearm, but her weight leaning into his body made it impossible. Now, I don't know how a man the size of Buford, an athletic guy who had been a wrestler, claims that he had been in the Marine Corps. I'm not sure how he could say he couldn't get a woman Pauline size off of him so he could retrieve his gun. It's just an amazing story when you think about it. So many contradictions here that it just seems like it's impossible. Now, I might add that it's 2.1 miles from that first ambush site down to the second ambush site. And by now, he is blazing along, whereas I'm going roughly 30 miles an hour. He's going to be traveling much faster. He's got his headlights on. He can see. So it's not going to take him nearly as long to get to the second ambush site as it will me. So there's a lot of factors that you have to think about here. How did that ambush party know to wait for him out here on this road rather than 45 and 64 along either part of that? Why do a rolling ambush? That makes no sense whatsoever. Why not just sit out in front of his house and snipe him as he walks out the door? That would have been much easier than what he said they attempted to do here. So his story is just not adding up, any way, shape, fashion, or form. Of course, he said that he was going to Hollis Jordan's to answer a disturbance call, and his story about Pauline insisting on going with him doesn't seem to hold a lot of logic. It's bizarre that she would want to go, and Buford's chief deputy, Jim Moffett, had said that she never went with him anywhere, that if Buford went somewhere at night and he needed someone to go along, he would call Jim. Jim would get ready. He would swing by his house there in Stantonville, pick him up, and they would go together. And ironically, he said there was only a couple of times he could remember that he hadn't been on calls with Buford, and both times he got shot. Now, that should tell us a lot about Buford's ability to tell a good story that may or may not have any factual base to it whatsoever. Now, here comes another vehicle, so I've had to turn on my lights again. And you can see that this road is just blacktop. It's not gravel like it was in those days. Of course, I turned my lights off except for my parking lights. I keep those on so I can see the center line, because I don't want to run off the road. And of course, there are people that will insist that if you knew this road as well as some people might, that they could have accomplished this driving it at high speeds with no headlights. But now here we're approaching the second ambush site, and this is the site where he said Pauline was killed. Now, Buford's story was that he came down through here, stopped at approximately this spot where I'm standing. He said he stopped to check on Pauline, that he opened his door, started to get out and go around the car. He had one foot on the ground and one still in the car. He said about that time, the Cadillac returned, stopped right beside him, just feet away. Gun came out the window, shots were fired. He was hit by one of the first rounds. Now, what is so amazing is that he said that he fell to the floor, the floorboard itself, and that probably saved his life. He said shots continued to come, apparently. He claimed to have either been unconscious or semi-conscious at that time. He didn't know how long he was on the floorboard, he would tell the TBI. The thing that's difficult for me to understand about this is that he said that Pauline had leaned over on him, grabbed his arm, gasping for air, that she was still alive when she arrived here. However, when you think about that, how did he fall to the floorboard? Then he said she got hit by a second shot in the head, and that's when she was killed. Being only semi-conscious or unconscious, he didn't know how long he laid on the floorboard. He said when he came to, he reached over, grabbed the steering wheel, pulled himself up, and as he turned and looked at the car parked beside him, they were still there. Gun was still out the window. He said he reached out, grabbed the barrel of the rifle, and struggled to hold on to it as they drove away. And he lost the rifle barrel. All one needs to do to figure out what the real story probably is to just follow the chain of witnesses, people that were never interviewed or were allowed to give a statement to the TBI back in 1967, as far as I know. People like Shirley Smith and Barbara Bivens, who said that they overheard Buford in the parking lot of the Old Hickory Grill threatening Pauline's life just hours before she was killed. There was Dennis and Johnny, Dennis Hathcock and Johnny Harrison, who'd been following Buford around that night just for the fun of it. They were teenage kids. They didn't have video games back in 1967 like we do now, so that was one of the pastimes that a lot of the kids engaged in. They were in Eastview when they observed Buford in a gun exchange with a car with Oklahoma tags. Then there's LaVon Plunk, Pauline's best friend, the wife of Deputy Petey Plunk, who had taken Pauline home that night to get the kids and her personal belongings. Pauline had been staying in a motel in Savannah at one time just so that she could be away from Buford. And while LaVon was waiting, she saw Buford come home, go in the house, and then she said she heard a single gunshot. Didn't know who she could talk to, didn't know who she could call. So she just went home and was dwelling on this when Petey called and said, well, Pauline just got killed in an ambushment for Buford. And then there's the county coroner, Ward Moore. He had the power to arrest Buford if necessary. That was just the way that the chain worked over there. And he told me that he had received a call from Carl Pusser, who was working the jail that night, dispatching, and he was the jailer. And he said, Carl told him, you need to get over to Buford and Pauline's because they're in a big fight and they're about to kill each other. Well, he went over there, but when he arrived, they had already gone. He did say he saw a couple of droplets of blood down on the carpet, not like blood spatter from a high velocity impact, but more like somebody had probably been hit, had a busted lip, a bleeding nose. Who knows what blood droplets were from, but there wasn't much he could do. They were gone. Then there was Diane, who was there that night. She said that she had heard Buford and Pauline arguing out in the living room. And being afraid of Buford herself, she didn't want to go out there. And she heard a pop. That's all she described it as, was a pop. Said a little bit later, she hears the front door open. She looks outside her window and sees Buford carrying Pauline and putting her in the car. And then there's the odd route that he took to go to this alleged call that he got around 4 a.m. to the state line to Hollis Jordan's place, a beer joint, about a mile north of the state line. And he goes down this convoluted system of roads. I mean, nothing about Buford's story makes sense. And then when you look at photographs of the car, the blood evidence, that doesn't match Buford's story. There's just so much here that's not right. And yet, Pauline died. They made a big deal out of Buford. He becomes a national hero. He's going to play himself in the second Walking Tall movie. And then he kills himself as a drunk driver in an accident on Highway 64. It's sad to know that Pauline died for nothing, and she deserves justice, and she deserves to be remembered, not Buford. So, here's a little tribute to Pauline.